Hey everybody, it's Avi Tenenbaum, and as I was putting together the material for last year, I came across something really interesting in this book that I have to show you. It's going to be a bit of a detour, but it just is so perfect for the TFRP community. So the question is it possible to fall into taiva and to chase your desires and do things you shouldn't do, but still be a person of faith? Now, I'm not saying you should do things that you shouldn't be doing, because you shouldn't be doing them. And you know you shouldn't be doing them. But the question is it possible that a person chases after lust and is still a person of faith? Is that possible? We're going to get there, okay? So it all started with me looking for last year in this book, and I come across this thing about Rachav Hazona, Rachav the prostitute. And the Alter of Kelm says it's perplexing, it's shocking. He says, Neira'is nishtay mamti. How could it be that Rachav the prostitute married Yehoshua Bin Nun, who was the prime student of Moshe Rabbeinu? He was the Gadol Hador. He brought Klal Yisrael into Israel, waged all these wars. He even made a miracle which got the sun to stand in the middle of the heavens during a battle. So he was the ultimate Gadol Hador, Talmud Chacham, Tzaddik, Mekubal, Baal Meifes, Admor. And you would think he would marry the best girl from the best Beis Yaakov that, had the perfect grades and everything was just perfect in her life, and she's got the good yichus. And he marries Rachav the prostitute. Okay? So he is assuming that Rachav is a prostitute because he calls her Rachav Hazona, Hazona, Hazona. Look at the piece. The Alter of Kelm clearly refers to her as a prostitute, as a Zayna. Now you'll say to me, Avi, but isn't it a famous machlokes? And Zayna maybe means that she ran a pundak, she had some sort of a bed and breakfast. The answer is, there's more than enough chazals to tell you that she was a prostitute. Look in the Gemara, it says, Kol ha'imar Rachav Rachav biad nikri. I think that's a Gemara in Megillah. Look at the Gemara in Zvachim Kufta Zayin Beis, where she is talking about men who would come and do those things with her. She was definitely a prostitute. The question is, did she also, for a side hustle, or maybe this was the side hustle, did she also run a bed and breakfast? That's a good question. So it could be she did both. And a good friend of mine, a Talmud Chacham, Reb Mati Jacobovic, who I sometimes quote in these videos, who's a chavrusa of mine, he showed me in Michtav Me'Eliyahu, I have it over there, Chelek Gimel, I think it's page 335. I wasn't planning on mentioning it in the video, but here I did. But Bli Neder, I could put a picture of this into the end of the video. Bli Neder, he talks about how when there is a seemingly argument in Igadita, right, was she a prostitute or did she run a restaurant? The answer is both. And each opinion is just saying to you, if you want to truly understand the Rachav story or personality, you have to approach her as mainly being a hotel owner or mainly being a prostitute. So it's not that they disagree in reality, it's that each person is coming and emphasizing something about Rachav that they wanted you to take as the main thing about that person when you're approaching that subject, okay? Anyhow, so Rachav was a prostitute. And she was a prostitute, the Gemara says in Zvachim, for 40 years, from age 10 to age 50. And the Gemara even says that she was doing tshuva after she became Jewish. She converted, she did tshuva, she repented for being a prostitute. It wouldn't make sense that she was repenting for running a motel, because what's wrong with that, right? So anyways, comes back the Alter of Kelm and says in this book, Beis Kelm, page 57, how could it be that she marries the Gadol Hador, Yehoshua Bin Nun? What merit did she have? Because things don't happen for free. They don't stam happen. It must be she had something meritorious and virtuous about her that she earned the merit of such a good shidduch, of the Gadol Hador. So the Alter of Kelm answers, V'hakol lama, why is all of this? Bishvil, because shehikiru ha'emunah b'neiv shalim, because she recognized faith with a full heart. The Yada B'das Shrema, and she knew on a complete level, on a level of completion, the following. What did she know completely? And now it's a quote from her talking to the spies in Sefer Yehoshua, Perek Beis, Pasuk Yud Aleph. She says herself, Ki Hashem Elokechem, Hashem your God, Hu Elokim, He is the God, Bashamayim Mima'al, in the heavens above, V'al Haaretz Mitachas, and down here in this world, what you might call the outer space, the inner space, in the most intimate parts of our lives, in the galaxies, in the cosmos, everywhere, Hashem is God and the God, right? So the Alter of Kelm says that she knew this idea of faith on a higher level than everybody else in her generation, at least all the other women that weren't married yet, which is what merited her to marry Yehoshua Bin Nun, and presumably the reason why Yehoshua Bin Nun would want to marry her, because you have to explain why would he want to marry her. And it seems like that was his priorities. He wasn't looking for yichus, because she didn't have any yichus. He wasn't looking for a girl that never went off the derech, because she had a sketchy past. But he was looking for a girl that had complete faith. So, take it or leave it, this is what the Alter of Kelm talks about on page 57, Beis Kelm. Check it out, try to understand. But that's what he says, okay? So it leaves some questions. We have to figure out exactly the answer. Go think about that. But the facts are the facts. Yehoshua Bin Nun married Rachav Hazona. Alter of Kelm, who we respect and love, says, why did she merit this? Because she had a higher level of faith than other people. That's the end of the Alter of Kelm. Now, when I looked at this, I said, how could that be? What's going on? How could it be that a prostitute who is a prostitute from age 10 to 50, this is her whole life, aside from being a hotel owner, how could it be that this presumably lowly, worldly person whose whole profession was enabling lust in others and assumedly lusting herself to some degree, and living in this very low, immoral profession, how could it be that she had so much faith? I mean, how could faith and znus go together? How could promiscuity and faith go together? Does that make any sense? How does it make sense? As I was perusing through the writings of the Alter of Kelm, the alarm clock for Mincha cut us off, so we'll go to Mincha soon. But as I was looking from the writings of the Alter of Kelm for an answer about what the Alter of Kelm said, I found on page 40 of the same book another Alter of Kelm saying the following. People see others falling into taiva, right? Znus is taiva, right? And they judge them, right? So I see somebody falling into taiva and I judge them. I say, oh, if he falls into taiva, if she falls into taiva, it must mean that they don't believe in God. Says the Alter of Kelm, it's not true. Einam yodim, those judgmental people don't know. Ki yesh ba'adam hakoyach neda ribaynai v'lim ribaynai. They don't realize, those judgmental people, that it's possible for a human being to know about God and have faith in Him and still to fall into taiva and still to rebel against Him. And if you look in the footnote here, footnote 60 on page 40 of the book, Beis Kelm, I'll try to put the pictures in the end of the video. Again, you see the Alter of Kelm says, promiscuity and faith don't have to contradict. It is possible to fall into taiva, fall into lust, and still have faith in God. Now, we're not saying that you should be lustful, and of course you could use Emunah to overcome taiva, to prevent taiva at the very least, right? To believe that there's a reckoning and that Hashem is going to look at all our actions. Ha'ayin roya v'ha'oizon shaymaas v'kol ma'asech b'sever nechtavim yesh din v'yesh dayin. There's yiras ha'einish, etc., etc. Okay, it's possible to use faith to prevent sinning. That's a different topic. Don't get me wrong. But says the Alter of Kelm on page 40 of this book, it is possible to have faith and still to fall into lust and make bad decisions. Especially, he says, if you don't learn Musar and you don't work on yourself, so you believe there's a God, and you have a huge unbridled Yetzer Hara, which you haven't taken the steps to tame, and he gets the best of you. But the point is, you see, it is possible to do znus and have Emunah. And he says, if you don't think that's true, you're wrong. So it's really interesting. I was not expecting to get into this topic, but it is certainly relevant to the people in TFRP and a great offshoot as we are talking about Emunah to get into this topic. Now you have to wonder, I'm looking for my fancy papers to see where I was going next with this. You have to wonder, okay, we did this, we did that. What was Rachav Hazona doing tshuva for? Because the Gemara says in Zvachim Kufta Zayin and Beis, she was repenting for being a Zona. But she wasn't yet Jewish at the time. So what law was there, which isn't in the Torah, because she wasn't beholden to the Torah, which one of the 7 mitzvos of Noach was she beholden to that she can't do a znus, that she can't be a Zona, right? She was a single woman. It's not like she did adultery or anything like this. So what was wrong with what she did that she was repenting for this? And this is the question that the Ben Yehoyada, the Ben Ish Chai, who wrote the book Ben Yehoyada, very important set on Agadata. You gotta get it if you ever want to understand Agadata. He is struggling with this issue. If you look in the Ben Yehoyada on Zvachim Kufta Zayin and Beis, where it talks about Rachav Hazona repenting, what was she repenting for? She didn't know any better. She didn't receive the Torah at Har Sinai. Why is she doing tshuva for znus? Let her do znus. She's not hurting anybody. What's she doing wrong? So he says a fascinating thing, and I never knew this. Well, is that a chiddush? There's a lot I don't know, right? He says to look in Bereshis Rabbah, Parsha Vav, by Shechem. I looked there, couldn't find anything. But I looked in the Eiter Midrashim on Shechem, and so if you look in Parshas Vayishlach, Perek Lamed Daled, Pasuk Beis, it says over there that Shechem saw Dinah. So there's a whole question of how did he see her? Why was she outside? A lot of interesting chazals. He saw her, he wanted her, he took her, and he raped her. Right? So it says in this pasuk, Shechem ben Chamor Hachivi Nesi Haaretz. He saw her. In other words, it gives you Shechem's name, it gives you the name of his father, it gives you his tribe, and it gives you his university degree, his title. He was the Nesi Haaretz. So why does it tell us he was the Nesi Haaretz, right? Imagine if you look at Fox News and it says like, John Smith, PhD, went and did this. So why is it telling us that he was the Nesi Haaretz and he saw Dinah and raped her? So if you look on the pasuk, on the words Nesi Haaretz from the Medrash says, what is it teaching us he was a Nesi Haaretz? So small sidetrack, but super important idea, and it all comes back to this idea of faith, so don't worry. We spoke about how important it is, leadership when it comes to faith, right? What are our leaders doing and who we're following and listening to? Who are our thought leaders and how do they behave and what do they teach? So says the Medrash, what is it teaching us that Shechem was the Nesi Haaretz, the president of the area, and he went and raped Dinah? It's telling you that anytime some Joe Schmo goes and breaks a rule, people break rules, we have to punish them. It's a problem, but it's not the biggest problem. But you know when it's the biggest problem? When a community leader breaks a rule, that's devastating. That tears down the rule completely. That shows that the rule is not important. And so, Shechem was an important leader, and it says, Ma melamdeinu. What is it teaching us, these words, Nesi Haaretz? Ela. It's teaching us, Kol pirza she'ena ba'a min hagdolim, ena pirza. Any breaking of a rule, any violation of a standard that doesn't come from a great leader, it's not such a big deal. But if it's a big leader, it's a big deal. In Shechem, breaking this rule was a big deal. Well, what rule did he break? So now it says for our topic, Shemisha Shaba Mabul Oilam Gadur Gadar Al Ha'arayos. When the Mabul happened, it was pretty traumatic. Wow, the world just got destroyed. Pretty crazy stuff, right? That would have made the news. We would have been doing psychological first aid, post-traumatic stress disorder treatment, EMDR, SE, TFCBT, whatever it is, we would have been doing therapy for everybody in the world at that time. That was traumatic. The world was destroyed. And so in the post-Mabul era, these survivors of the Mabul event got together and they said, we better do something to make sure that the world doesn't ever go back to that really promiscuous, bad place. So one of the rules that they made was an international law. They made a gadru gadar al harayos. They made a rule about promiscuity. No more promiscuity. We will enforce it. No more promiscuity. V'lo hayu prutzim ba'arayos. And then the world was no longer promiscuous. All those generations from then all the way till Shechem. V'zeh, and this jerk, this guy Shechem, this Baal Taiva, b'pnei sir chasai ma'al. Because of his bad midos and his taivas, he broke the rule. So on a micro level, he hurt Dinah and raped her, and he ended up bringing calamity to his town. On a macro level, he just destroyed the insurance policy that the world made in order to prevent the Mabul from happening again, or calamity coming to the entire world. They made a rule. They said, we better not go back to that place because God got really angry. We don't want the world to be destroyed again. Let's stop being promiscuous. Let's learn our lesson. Okay. And they did that till this guy broke the rule. So very interesting. And that's what Nasi Haaretz teaches us. But the point is now, that itself is important. You should pause the video and think about that. And I hope the world now, that we make some rules so that we don't bring calamity to ourselves, because the world's looking real bad. And if you look in Pirkei Rebbe Lazar, it describes in detail the arayos and promiscuity that people in the Dor Mabul did then. We're doing all the same things. We're watching people do the same things. We're doing the same things. We're making rules to enable it and allow it and encourage it, and it's really bad. Anyways, Nachzor Ininenu, to go back to our topic. So Rachav Hazona, she broke that rule. So it was way after the time of Shechem, but the rule still existed. There was international law. Like you have international law today, and you have the court, international courts in Hague, however you say it, and they uphold international law, right? So you can't use certain weapons in war, and you can't do certain things. So there was international law. No promiscuity, right? So she broke that by being a zona. That was against the international law that the people enacted for themselves as a security against calamity and to please God. She broke that, and that's why she was doing tshuva in the Gemara in Zvachim, Kuf Tes Zayin Amid Beis. Okay? So that's the pshat. That's what Ben Yoyada says. That's what she was doing tshuva for. So she did znus. She was a prostitute from age 10 to age 50. Then she converted. She did tshuva on the breaking of the moral code of the world, and she was not only a Jew at this point, and not only a balas tshuva for her mistakes that she made in her life, because we all make mistakes, but we don't all do tshuva. But she did tshuva. She also had the highest level of faith, and Yehoshua Bin Nun married her. Okay, and that goes back to that idea of Emunah. And if you look, just a tiny, tiny detail, if you look in this book, Torah Shebal Peh, which is a collection of midrashim on Nach and on our pasuk in Yehoshua Beis Yir Aleph, where Rachav, the prostitute at the time, says to the messengers, to the spies, she says, your God is God in heaven above and in earth down below, right? That's what she says. So it says that there were other thought leaders in the world. It's not like she was the first person to talk about faith. But here's the thing. If you compare the faith of each type of person, their level of faith was different. There are levels of faith. And so Yisro said, Ata yadati ki gadol Hashem mikol Elohim. Right? Now I know that God is greater than the other gods. And so the Medrash here says, he still admitted there were other gods. He didn't really pull monotheism all the way. He just admitted that God was the greatest of whatever may be. And then there was a guy named Naaman, and in the pasuk there he says, I know that God is the God Ba'aretz. Okay? God is the God of the world. But he didn't, in other words, on a certain level he pulled him down into the day-to-day. But he still didn't attribute God to the cosmos, into the bigger picture and the outer space, as Rabbi Kaplan might call it, right? And then it was Rachav Hazona that she came and said, God is the God in the outer space and outer worlds, and in the deepest, most gashmiistic, mundane parts of this world. He's Bashamai Mimal, Val Aretz Mitachas, the only God. So now she pulled it past Yisro and past Naaman, but there was one guy that beat her, and who was that? Moshe. Moshe came and said, Ki Hashem hu ha'elokim, Bashamai Mimal, Val Aretz Mitachas, which is exactly what Rachav said, but then he added two words, Ein Od, and with conviction I know there is nothing else. And that's the Emunah that we're striving for. So she had the highest level of Emunah of anybody at the time, since Moshe was dead. But Moshe still had a higher level of Emunah of Ein Od. Bilti Hashem Levado. There is nothing else. Not Mother Nature, not politics, nothing else. Nothing else. Kochi V'otzim Yadi, no, not that either. Nothing else but Hashem. Bashamai Mimal Val Aretz Mitachas Ein Od, which we say every day, right? In davening. So, it's important to know that there are many levels of faith, and I say this all the time, and at risk of sounding controversial, you know what? I'm going to say it. There are many thought leaders that the Jewish people, especially the English-speaking people, have had in the last 50 years, okay? And some of them are incredible. But pay attention to what level of faith did they bring you to? What level of faith did they see and are they describing? And when they talk about Emunah, are they talking about Yisro's Emunah, Naaman's Emunah, Rachav's Emunah, Moshe's Emunah? When I get older, I'm going to say more details about this because I have a big diatribe about this. I have a lot of classes to give on this. But the faith out there in the world is faith. It's better than no faith. But is that the faith of the Torah? Is that the faith of Moshe that we're trying to aim for? Or it's like the next best thing? That's where I'm going to leave it at that for now. Okay? I'm going to wrap up this class with a crazy, insane, incredible, unbelievable, exciting, astounding Gra, Vilna Goin, on this topic. If you look in Even Shleiman, this is going to bring it all back to the beginning. This is one of the most amazing things that I've ever learned. It's a big thing to say. And I gave a TFRP on this. I don't remember which one, but we definitely quoted it in one of the earliest TFRPs. If you look at Even Shleiman, Perek Gimel, chapter 2. So the Gra here says a fascinating idea. All sins in the world come from wanting things that we shouldn't want and not being happy with what we have. And when we're happy with what we have, then we do the right thing and we keep the Torah. So that's the first thing he says. Very interesting angle on why people murder and look at pornography and steal and speak Lashon Hara and break Shabbos. Anything, basically he says, all sins come from wanting things you shouldn't want, which comes from not appreciating what you have. Okay, fine. So we're not getting into that the second. But then he takes it a step further and he accentuates it a little bit, and this is what I want. Hu haistapkos shehu ahepech hu yisoid shel kol Torah. Being happy with what you have is the pillar of the entire Torah. V'hu, and what I mean to refer to is Emunah Shlema, having complete faith. That's our topic. That's the TFRP topic of today, right? Having complete faith, Shlein lidoig da'agas machar, that you're not worried about tomorrow. You have everything that you need, you're happy with what you have, and you're not trying to accumulate and pull towards yourself things that don't belong to you, whether it's relationships that don't belong to you, items that don't belong to you, ideas that you shouldn't be having. You should be happy with what you have complete faith that everything will work out, and be content where you are so that you don't need to come onto sin. Okay, fine. Interesting idea, but it's still not our topic. Here's the clincher. Then he says, Umi sheni b'tayv b'midas habitachon, and the person whose heart is good with trusting in God, in other words, a person who is accomplished as a person, that he has worked on trusting in God, he is an accomplished truster in God, even though he transgresses, that's the word, very serious sins, hu yaiser toiv mimishu mechusar bitachon sha'ideza balidekina v'sina afal bisho isek v'tayr ugmilas chasadim shekalza enai ela la'asais laishain. Let me just say it like this. He says you have two types of people. Over here, you have on the scales, right? So on scale number 1, you have a person who trusts in God. He really trusts in God. He has bitachon, which is what we're talking about. It's the other side of the coin of faith. We spoke about that in the last video in the beginning. Somebody who really has faith in God, even though he transgresses very serious sins. Give me some examples of serious sins. Tell me some examples. He steals $10,000 from someone. He cheats somebody out in business. He has a forbidden relationship. He breaks Shabbos. Okay? So I don't know what the example is for you. But a person who has very strong trust in God, even though he occasionally transgresses very serious sins, because we said that that's possible. Right now you're going to get confused on the first part of the Gra that I said. But we said from the Alter of Kelm, it's possible that I can have trust in God, faith in God, and an unchecked Yetzer Hara, which pulls me down into sin. But it's possible to believe in God and to sin greatly. So a person who has trust in God in general, even though he sometimes falls into very serious sin, he's better off than the person who does not trust in God, who learns Torah, does chesed, but is filled with all sorts of bad midos like jealousy and hatred, and all the good things that he's doing is just to get a name for himself, to get some kavod, to become famous, to get some respect so that people call him rabbi and they invite him to their dinner and he gets all sort of respect and he feels good about himself. That guy with faith, who's good in his heart, except he's got to work on his Yetzer Hara. We're not saying he doesn't. We're not saying he could transgress the Yetzer Hara and the Averos and do serious sins. He shouldn't. He should stay away from the Yetzer Hara. He should prevent falling into that place. He's got to work on himself. But he has faith, even though he transgresses serious sins. He's better than the guy who learns Torah. He learns Torah, he does chesed, but he doesn't have faith. And he's just doing everything in a shallow way, not to serve God, but to serve himself. So the Gra says, it's possible to have bitachon, and to make serious transgressions, and you're better than that guy who doesn't do the terrible things that you did, who has no faith. So that's a chizik, guys. That's a big chizik if you ever did those things, if you ever want to do those things, if you're on the way to doing those things, if you just came from doing those things, if you're about tshuva and in your past you did those things. And I speak to so many people that their past breaks their heart. How did I do this? I have so much tshuva to do. You're still better off if you have faith and you have a propensity for evil than the guy who doesn't have that propensity for evil, but he has no faith. So that's a chizik. And let's at least try to be like Rachav Hazona. She did znus for 40 years. She did tshuva. She turned her life around. She became the greatest person of faith in her generation. She married into the greatest family. She had a great ending. And it says in Chazal that 8 prophets came out of her. Huldah Hanaviyah, one of the prophetesses, female prophet, and 7 other prophets. So that's a great legacy to have. From being a prostitute to being a bubby of 8 prophets and marrying Yehoshua Bin Nun and doing tshuva. What a story. What a chizik. Okay? So let's take this chizik and let's know what the Alter of Kelm says. It's possible to have faith and to sin, which is why we got to learn Musar and work on ourselves. Be aware of our weaknesses. Manage our triggers, figure that stuff out with the therapist, by yourself, with Musar Svarim, all together, etc. But you're a great person, and you're doing great, and you're going to go to great places. Let's just make sure the Yetzer Hara doesn't pull us down, and we're going to be very close to God. And let's work towards the faith of Moshe Rabbeinu, where he says, Ein od, there's nothing else but God, nothing else. Not me, not you, not Mother Nature, not Biden, Trump, Putin, whoever you want, whatever you want, Lapid, because now Lapid at the time of this video, he's the Rosh Hashanah. There's nobody and nothing else but Hashem in all of our affairs, to the smallest detail and to the farthest cosmos and everything in between. Have a good day. Hey everybody, it's Avi Tenenbaum, and I thought of a really important thing that I forgot to put in today's shir, so we're going to add it now. I'm in a park near my house. I remember that a number of years ago, I wrote a paper on the 12 steps and Emunah and Bitachon. And I have a lot of really interesting sources in that paper. I never edited it. I have enough material for sure to publish a book, and I never got around to editing it and publishing it. One day God should help me to fulfill all my dreams and publish this stuff. But in that paper, I remember somewhere in there was a source that had to do with today's topic about having faith and sinning, and I said, I gotta go look up that paper again. I found it deep in my inbox somewhere. I have like 14,000 emails in my inbox, and I found it deep somewhere inside. I opened up the paper, I looked inside, and on page 3, I quoted Rabbi Yisrael Salanter in the Sefer Kadosh Yisrael. And he says on page 77 in Sefer Kadosh Yisrael, says Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, that even a thief needs faith. And if he would have faith in God, that God would help him do the bank heist, the robbery, the mugging successfully, there is no question that he would be successful. Okay? So that is the quote of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. And if you look in the footnote on that page, I think it's students of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter there are quoting a tradition that they have from Rabbi Yisrael Salanter from the Vilna Gaon, that the Vilna Gaon himself said the same thing. That the Vilna Gaon had no doubt that if a thief were to commit a robbery and he would really, truly trust in God with genuine faith, there is no doubt that he would be successful. Okay? And then he quotes a Gemara in Brachos, and I said, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I didn't quote that Gemara in Brachos in our shir. So here's the Gemara in Brachos. The Gemara says on Daf Samach Gimel Amid Aleph, I think. It says, Darash Bar Kapara. There was once a tzaddik named Bar Kapara, and he learned from the pasuk. He said, which tiny parsha or topic in the Torah contains inside of it so many major things? That was his question. Show me something in the Torah that it's a tiny little sentence, a tiny little clause in the Torah, but it contains in it an enormous amount of central Torah concepts and principles in it. So he asked that question, which subtopic, which clause, which sentence in the Torah is like this? And he says, I'll tell you. It says in the pasuk, B'chol d'rachecha da'ehu, in all your ways you should know God. V'hu, and God, yeyasher orchosecha, and he will straighten out your ways. Okay, so that's the pasuk. The pasuk says, in all your ways you should know God, and he will straighten out your ways. So Bar Kapara said, this is a tiny clause in the Torah that contains in it multitudes, because now we have to remember God when we eat, when we sleep, everything we do, we want to do l'shem shamayim. We're always connecting the mundane and things that seem to be irrelevant and not important back to God. Everything goes back to the service of God. We're mission driven, and we are always trying to know God in all of our ways. Okay. Says the Hemshech, the continuation of that Gemara, Amar Rava, va'afiru nedvar aveira. So Rava adds the words, and even for sin. So Rava is saying, even for sin, you should remember God and know God. So what's that talking about? What does it mean? So does it mean that when I sin, I should still remember God? So says the Ben Yoyada, again, second time we're quoting him today, on that Gemara, yes, that's exactly what it means. It means when you are about to do a sin, have faith in God, not that he should help you, which is what the Gra and Rabbi Yisrael Salanter were talking about. That's one idea. But now we're saying an alternative idea from the Ben Yoyada. He says, when you are about to commit a sin, don't pretend God isn't there. God is there. And remember that he's giving you life and vitality and strength to live even when you're going against him, right? You're going to go now to a really bad place and do some bad things. And that's going to take you 2 hours. And during the 2 hours, God is giving you life. And remember that. Don't pretend it's not there. Don't compartmentalize and pretend God doesn't exist. God exists. Keep having faith in him. You had faith in him before. So the fact that you're now going against him doesn't mean you should pretend he's not there. He's there. He's aware of what's going on. He's giving you life to do the thing that you're choosing to do now, even though you shouldn't even be doing it, and he doesn't want you to do it. And remember that, because by remembering that and keeping God in the picture, even when you sin, says the Ben Yoyada, this is what's going to help you to eventually feel bad about what you did and do tshuva, because you still have what's called God consciousness. You're still conscious of God. You see, a lot of people, when they make mistakes and they make bad choices in life, they're at a crossroads, so they have what's called cognitive dissonance, right? They say, well, I believe in God, but I'm not allowed to do what I'm about to do, so now I'm going to pretend God doesn't exist. So to solve that, says Rava in the Gemara, remember God even during a sin, be humble, have faith, remember God is there, keep him in the picture, and that's going to help you to grow and make a comeback from this sin. And I thought that is such an amazing message for people in TFRP to hear, because we're genuine people and we try to do the right thing, but sometimes we make mistakes and we sin. Don't pretend that God isn't there. He's there. Work with him. Remember him. Bring him with you. Take him with you. He's right there everywhere you're going. He knows what you're doing. He knows what you're up to. Let's keep having faith in Hashem. Ask him to help us, and we'll keep growing. So that's the main thing that I wanted to bring out. I'm glad that I remember that. Hashem helped me to remember it and share it with you. Guys, you should have a great, beautiful week and a great night. Thank you. In a post video, I remember one time when I was young. Well, I'm still young. When I was even younger, and I was the oldest guy in yeshiva, and a lot of younger boys used to speak to me because I was an older guy in yeshiva. And there was this one guy who he used to do some pretty bad stuff in town here in Yerushalayim. Every Saturday night, he would go and hang out with some bad people and do some bad stuff. And I was on a bus Saturday night once, and I saw him on the bus, and I knew exactly where that guy was heading, and he knew that I knew because he spoke to me about it in the past. And I went over to him gently, and I was, 22 then, 23, and I said to him, listen, we both know where you're going. I get it. It's hard for you to stop. It's hard for you to not do these things. I understand. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be learning Mishnayos on the bus on the way there. You're still in yeshiva. You still are a chashuv person. And you still have other great parts of who you are. And you shouldn't separate them. And the fact that you're going now to do something that's not the right thing, and it's regrettable, and it's a mistake, and you got to grow out of this and deal with that, it doesn't mean that now you throw everything else out the window. You're the same one person. Let's keep Hashem in the picture. Learn on the bus, even on the way to doing the sin that you're going to do. And that will eventually help you to bring yourself back to the greater parts of who you are and help you get out of this. So, just a cute little story.